Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the New Digital Operating Model Conference Call hosted by Kepner-Tregoe. My name is Joanne and I'm your event manager. During the presentation, your lines will remain on listen only, and if you require assistance at any time, please key star and 0 on your telephone, and a coordinator will be happy to assist you. You may submit web questions throughout the presentation by clicking on the Q&A tab, indicated by a question mark. Type your questions and send to all panelists, and these will be addressed in the Q&A session. I'd like to advise all parties this conference is being recorded, and I would like to hand over to Carlos. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Joanne. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know your time is very valuable, so we do appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. Also, I'd like to thank Kepner-Tregoe for hosting this free webinar. I think we've got some great information that you'll all really appreciate and help you get your work done at your respective organizations. In regard to the questions and answers, as mentioned, please post those through the Q&A. I'll be going through some of those. If I see that they're very specific to the slides that are being presented at that time, I may interject and ask Charlie or Christoph to refer to those at that time. Otherwise, we'll do all the questions and answers at the end. But please put those through, send them in. We'll, if we can't get to them at the end, we will reach out to you, whether Christoph or Charlie or Kepner-Tregoe. Someone will get back to you with answers to your questions. Okay? So again, thank you very much. As Joanne said, my name is Carlos Casanova. I'll be moderating the session today. We have two great speakers. The first is going to be Charlie. I'll speak to him, his bio in a second, and then Christoph will come up a little bit later. I'll address Christoph's background when we get to that point. So our first speaker, like I said, is Charlie Betz. Charlie's an author, advisor, consultant, and faculty, and he's been called one of the world's foremost experts in the practice of IT management. He is the author of Architecture and Patterns for IT Management and currently represents Armstrong Group to the IT for IT Forum. He has held product management, analyst, and architect positions for Wells Fargo, AT&T, Best Buy, Target, EMA, and Accenture. Charlie, it's all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos, and welcome. And I want to again thank everybody for taking time out of their busy days to hear this discussion. I think we've got some very exciting and interesting content here, if I do say so myself. Very pleased to be presenting this. So I'm going to talk about what is an operating model, and we're going to talk about the question of scale and how it relates to how we think about operating models in the digital world, and especially an emergence approach to the operating model with a thought experiment that starts with the idea of a founder growing to a team, and then a team of teams, and then the enterprise. I think that this approach can illuminate a lot of the issues that we often see in discussions of digital management and IT management. So first I want to ask the question, what is an operating model? An operating model is distinct from the business model. The business model is about strategy, markets, channels, and the product, your actual product choices, your go-to-market approach. Operating model is often defined as people, process, and technology. And I went through some of the existing and current definitions, and I feel that people, process, and technology are still a very reasonable place to start as we think about an operating model. So as we discuss this emergent operating model, please do realize that I am lumping together people, process, and technologies. I believe there's a core set of challenges that many companies are seeing as they digitally transform. We have common challenges like, how do I manage my infrastructure? How do I build and sustain compelling digital products? How do I increase my release tempo for fast feedback? And what does culture have to do with digital success? People might say, well, the operating models are always going to be specific to companies, but I believe we do have these common themes that need to be met at an operating model by any company seeking to compete in the digitally transforming economy. So there is not a one-size-fits-all, however. fundamental point I want to make is that the operating model must scale as the company grows, and there are different concerns at different sizes. What got you here won't get you there is a quote we often hear. And in fact, the transition point from one scale to the next is where things get interesting and where some of the most heated industry arguments are happening. But the interesting thing is we haven't been talking enough about these scaling issues. We view startups in the Silicon Valley culture as unicorns, and we call enterprises horses. And maybe if you're comparing Facebook with Bank of America, maybe that's helpful. But I like to think more in terms of colts and foals versus yearlings versus full-grown horses. It's a continuum, not two different species. So this is the emergence model from the current book I'm working on. It's tentatively called Digital, From Startup to Enterprise. I've used this idea from startup to enterprise as I'm finding it very effective with my students. But it applies to any existing enterprise. You don't have to go through the process of forming a startup to benefit by using it as a thinking tool. I'll discuss further some of the problems we're seeing in the IT operating model discussions come from the state transitions that happen as we move our concern from the bottom to the top. And in particular, I'll highlight right now that transition from team-centric, the yellow icon, to team of teams is very challenging, and it's currently driving a lot of industry debate that may be familiar to some of you, such as ITIL versus DevOps or product versus project management. We'll talk about these things. So, starting as a founder, you have a very simple operating model. You need some sense of the digital value you're going to offer, what your reason for being is. But once you have that, your concerns are very practical. You don't have time for advanced operating model concepts like process frameworks or formal risk management. What tools and platforms are you going to use to deliver value? And once you decide on these tools, what is your overall flow of digital value delivery? You don't have time to formalize much more than that. An important point to this discussion, the operating model by definition formalized. It's documented in what you expect your teams to follow. It's explicit and not tacit. You may be thinking about security even as a founder. In fact, you better be, but you probably don't have a VP of security or a formalized risk management framework. So digital value. Now, you can find founders everywhere, not just in garages. The idea of having an entrepreneurial culture in larger enterprises, it's been around for years. Rosabeth Moss-Kanter in the 1980s was writing about intrapreneurship. This is increasing with digital transformation. I have a wonderful quote here from General Electric CIO Jim Fowler. Quote, "We've moved to a flatter organizational model with teams of teams who are focused on outcomes. These are co-located groups of people who own a small, minimum viable product deliverable that they can produce in 90 days. The team focuses on one piece of work that they will own through its complete life cycle." So we see, even in the largest and I believe now the oldest company in the Fortune 500, it's still all about value. And every member of your team needs to be focused on that. Now, infrastructure, before you can write any code, before you can write digital product, you have to decide on the platform. It's pretty hard to build before you decide on your tools. In many cases, this is decided for you. In other cases, it's greenfield. There's always a lot of churn here. We've had so many generations of infrastructure approaches, from mainframes to servers to serverless. I'm looking at a new opinionated platform like Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and I'm struck how we've come full circle. As far as I'm concerned, the mainframe was the original opinionated serverless platform. But one thing has emerged lately in infrastructure that I think will stick, and that's infrastructure as code. Whether we're talking about policy-driven server configuration management with Puppet or software-defined networking, infrastructure is now defined in code, and we are seeing an end to GUI and command line interaction with production systems. I'd also recommend, if you folks haven't heard yet of the SRE movement, Site Reliability Engineering, We're seeing amazing guidance on infrastructure and operations coming from the Googles and Facebooks of the world. In fact, there's a new O'Reilly book just written by Google on site reliability engineering. Again, very important contribution to the infrastructure conversation. Now that you decide your infrastructure, you've decided your platform, your tools, now it's time to actually start delivering digital value. And you need fast feedback from the customer. That is not optional. This is not about celebrating failure. We often hear this idea of celebrating failure. I'm not a fan of that concept. I think it's about accelerating learning. And this is where DevOps starts to come in, or at least the continuous delivery part of it. This starts at the very beginning of the journey. You need automated source control, build management, package management, deployment management of both your infrastructure and application. And this is day one in the garage, not something to defer until we have enough time. And if you don't have this figured out yet, it's your first priority. I'm quite comfortable stating that categorically. Okay, we are now a team. Hey, we've made it. Our startup has started to catch fire. We're making some progress with customers, and we're now thinking at the team level. Either, and perhaps if it's in the startup experiment, your startup succeeded, or perhaps you got promoted in your larger organization. It works either way, but now you've got a whole new set of operating model concerns: product, work, and operations. The team level is the value level. It's where the humans come together in close contact. Creativity can be maximized sometimes. Focus on teamwork, essential to the Agile movement. You'll see it all over the place at an Agile Alliance event or in their online materials. But what do we mean by this? Let's break it down in operating model terms. So, as the founder, you're now out talking to customers and investors. Good old days of cutting code in the garage with your best friend, your partner, they're behind you. Now, you've got a team to do that. They're good at building the thing right, but how do you know they're building the right thing? You've got to formalize product management. You need a product owner and some ability to start tracking your vision and communicating that intent. Back when it was just you and your friend, you would jot a few things down on a napkin or in your personal journal. But now you've got features, stories, requirements, whatever you call them, they represent your intent for the system, what you're hearing from your customers in the market, and now that intent has to be communicated to somebody else to try to build it. So product management is now part of your operating model, building on that initial vision for a minimum viable product. And you need work management. Product management's the what, work management's the how. Are you going to use a time box, cadenced approach like Scrum, or are you going to use a continuous flow approach like Kanban, something in between, some hybrid? How does your team track its work? How does your team define done? That's a huge one. What steps do you need to insist on as the founder? And where can the team self-organize to just achieve the outcome? And most important, you have got to limit work in process. Bake that into your organizational DNA. More than one entrepreneur has said the secret of success isn't what I do, it's what I choose not to. If you're in a larger context where multiple channels are forcing too much work into your team, into your system, you've got to fix that. Or leave, I'll go so far as to say, a chronically overloaded organization isn't going to go anywhere. And finally, operations. It's a thing. It's not going away. Not a fan of no-ops. Complex systems don't run themselves, and I think it's actually a miracle they work at all. In high-touch digital services, you're always going to have interrupt-driven work, starting with your customer's inquiry as to what good is this to me? How do I get value out of this product? Fine, you made the sale, now help me use it better, like the Apple Genius Bar. And complex systems fail. Top-tier digital firms like Google and Netflix get this. Their operating model is to design for reliability in the face of severe component failures, and when things do fail, they engage in blameless post-mortems, focused on solving the problems, not holding some poor individual, quote-unquote, accountable for being a flawed human being. How is it the human being was in a position to take the system down? That's the proper attitude, and I'll give a shout out to Kepner-Tregoe for having really cultivated the right attitude and the right approach to these kinds of questions. It's a real pleasure being able to give this discussion as their guest here today. Okay, the big ugly, team of teams. It's always hard. Some people don't want to make this transition. They'll just leave startups when startups get to this point. Oh, my startup became big, dumb company. And that's fine for them, but someone's going to stay behind. Hey, there's money to be made. Challenge here is protecting team-level delivery, whether you're dealing with multiple teams that have some, when you're dealing with multiple teams that have some form of dependency. Now, if you're a holding company and you've got, 15 products, none of which have anything to do with each other, maybe you don't have the team of teams problem as bad. But most companies are not that. Most companies, they start to scale up a product and they start to break it down into features and components, but there still is an overall need for a coordinated delivery, and this is a wicked problem. I'd be very wary of anyone selling magic beans here, and whether it's project management or process management or newer Agile approaches, the best we're going to get to is that there are a variety of tools in practice that, depending on your situation, might help, and they all have their pros and cons. But culture and organization is one of the most important aspects of all of this, and we're seeing more and more attention to culture nowadays. You have to decide your fundamental organizational approach. No matter how you define the concept of operating model, this one's key. How are you matrixed? Are you putting people in functional specialties and then organizing teams to go to the work? Or are you organizing your teams around product lines and bringing the work to the team? In culture, it's not just new age woo-woo anymore. Companies like Google are quantifying it. They've found, for example, Google has.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm just seeing that some people said they can't hear. Is everyone back online? I see your questions. I didn't see it through the chat. Is everyone that was having a problem hearing everything okay now? You can just reply through the Q&A as well if you were having a problem. If you're all set, please just say, just let me know. All right, Charlie, go ahead. And then if they still have issues, then I'll come back to them.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. So Google, for example, found that a sense of psychological safety is correlated with higher team performance and, therefore, the bottom line. The annual State of DevOps report by Puppet Labs, marvelous, very intellectually solid piece of work. I recommend the State of DevOps report categorically. It analyzes culture in terms of something called the Westrom typology. The Westrom typology is a well-grounded breakdown of companies into categories such as pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. And it's pretty clear from the research that pathological firms don't do well in terms of business results. These toxic psychological environments, they shut down people's creativity, they shut down collaboration, and the result is business failure. Now, when you're in the team of teams, this is where things get interesting in terms of the money. You start to see internal competition for money. It really heats up, and this is unavoidable. The fundamental operating model difference at the team of teams level. When you were a team in the garage, it was all for one and one for all. Now you're making a more diverse set of bets, kind of like taking out stock options, if you will. How do you do this? Do you base it on the highest paid person's opinion? Or do you do something a little more rational, like Spotify has a model they call DIB, data, insight, belief, and bet. Are you using a project portfolio? Are you assuming that work is always temporary and that by stipulating project plans, you will understand the value and the likelihood of success? Or are you using a product portfolio that's a bit more focused on outcome? As a single product-focused team, like I said, it was all for one and one for all, and now you've got this sense of multiple products, and you may have a sense of internal competition What has that other team done for us lately? You have accountability for timelines and results. That becomes an increasing conversation because now your communication is inevitably somewhat fragmented across the multiple teams, and they're starting to develop microcultures. Now, some of this maybe sounds sad or tragic, but it's just the nature of scaling. This is the problem you have to approach as you scale up your organization. Very interesting problems that start to emerge here. Carlos, how are we doing before I continue on here?
We're doing great. Plenty of time.
Okay, but and the audio is fixed?
Yep, they got it all resolved.
Okay, thank you. Execution management. Now, to me, this means the combination of supply with demand. This is the in-the-moment meeting of demand with supply and how you manage for flow in a multiple team delivery environment. Sometimes everybody has to get on the same release train, even with multiple products. Do all your teams have that same sense of overall mission? And then what about process? This is where process lives, is in the execution space. ITIL, for example, I think it's great for coordination in terms of the change process. I think the change process is key if you manage it correctly. But what scares me and what I've seen sometimes is when processes proliferate, breed like rabbits. Every time the slightest thing goes wrong, it's put in a new process, and pretty soon all you're doing is following processes. Some of the Agile thought leaders call this process as organizational scar tissue. And then you're not delivering value. All you're doing is following the process. I'm very concerned about any frameworks or best practice guidance that might lead people to putting in more processes than their organization can handle in terms of the resources they have to perform those processes. And I think this is the most poorly understood area of the digital operating model. We need to look to disciplines like industrial operations and research, industrial operations research for help here. There's a lot of good theory and math and research out there in that space and in the industrial engineering space, and we're seeing it starting to gradually filter into some of the IT and digital operating model conversation. I think we need more of that. Now, finally, you hit the enterprise level. Congratulations. Now, I want to reiterate that this discussion of operating models is based on what you formalize as a capability. You've been thinking about security, governance, information, architecture. You've been thinking about that all along. Of course you have. You wouldn't have gotten this big if you hadn't. But now you need to formalize them. You need that vice president and chief information security officer. You need that VP of risk management. You need formalized records management. I'll get to that in a bit. Now, just as many might drop out of organizations when you reach the team of teams level because there's too much bureaucracy, some people drop out of the organization here. It's just like, oh, this is just too big. But the enterprise concerns, if you stay, are very real and very unforgiving. You're now very conscious of external forces acting on you, from hackers to regulators to auditors to ethical and unethical competitors. You can no longer afford tactical firefighting responses. You need things like enterprise risk management. You're not going to have a choice in that. You need policy management, not optional for enterprises. However, there are some promising approaches for handling these kinds of requirements in the new digital operating model. Let's look, for example, at governance and security. Now, first of all, starting with governance, it's inevitable whenever an investor is distinct from the management of a company. And this is called the other people's money problem. It's as old as money. I love the example. I'll give a shout out to a gentleman named Brian Barnier who gave a perfect example of this. He said, suppose you're a shopkeeper. You've got a nice little store, and sometimes you hire a cashier, and they've got maybe they've got the keys to the cash register, but not to the safe. They've got the key to the front door to the store, but they don't have a relationship with your suppliers, right? But now you want to go on vacation for 6 months, and you need to hire a professional manager who's going to have the relationship with your suppliers, who's going to have access to your bank account, who is going to have the key to the safe. At that point, you are now in a governance relationship. This is one of the best ways of summing it up, thanks to Mr. Barnier. Now, governance is not management. It's two different things, and for further information, read COVIT, Control Objectives for Information Technology, from ISACA on that topic. Now, the problem with digital governance is that it's too often been focused on efficiency. And too often, governance has tried to reduce variability in very uncertain activities like digital product development, software development. And this issue has been at the heart of the Agile movement. But we're seeing a growing awareness of a huge paradox. The trouble is, when you put in a bunch of control and governance processes like project stage gates, required deliverables, and you're putting them in as risk reducers, you may well wind up increasing the risk of losing your investment because you're slowing down fast feedback. And I'll give a shout out also to Scott Ambler, who I think, he may be one of the first people to actually point this out. So that's an irony for you. Wouldn't it be crazy if risk management increases your risk? But, if you aren't fast to market, you're going to lose that investment that you made trying to get to market at all. Now, on the goodness side, in terms of security and auditing, the auditors are already learning to love infrastructure as code. Remember that? We talked about that, back in the first phase. And also continuous delivery and DevOps, because these approaches are more consistent and are leaving better audit trails. We're also seeing exciting automation, like automated vulnerability and pen testing, things like Netflix Security Monkey. It's a big shift here. It's very exciting, but certainly we have a long way to go, and we may never quite get there in terms of completely securing the digital infrastructure. Now let's talk about information. What do we mean by that? Very simple 5-word question. Customer. What do you mean by the word customer? Can lead to years of debate. And at scale, when you are dealing with multiple product and business lines, it needs ongoing attention. If you've got 5 microservices managing various data, well, the teams can probably work it out themselves. But when you're up to 1,500 microservices, how do you know that number 1501 isn't duplicating some data that some other service is already handling perfectly well? You need a formalized discipline to manage for that. Now, the idea of the single enterprise data model hasn't worked out really well. I'm a big fan of something called domain-driven design that gets us out of the business of trying to define one data model to rule them all. There's some real problems with that. But we still need some sense-making methods here, if only because regulators are interested in data that constitute official records. And these kinds of records, for example, they may or may not have to stay within one country. They may need to be sequestered if they're subpoenaed. You need to keep these records as long as required and no longer. And actually, I'm seeing a big convergence of classic records management with IT-related data management. Now, finally, and a bit more advanced, if you'll just bear with me, statistics and big data. Now, as we move into these highly scaled digital infrastructures, as we move into Internet of Things, we start to need to move past just simple binary true, false, 1, 0 ways of thinking about the world. We start to need the statistics and the big data. And this is not as familiar to a lot of computing professionals, people with backgrounds in computer science, for example, but it's essential to disciplines like site reliability engineering and also just, to delivering value, digital product value from, oceans of Internet of Things sensors. So it's like I said, a bit more of an advanced topic, but just think about that from binary to continuous. It's definitely happening. And finally, architecture, my old home. At best, it's a rewarding and creative position full of value-adding potential, but at worst, you're the one everyone loves to hate. But at scale, you still need a cadre, a group of folks who have a certain skill with abstractions. And if you're a successful company, you have these people. By the time you're an enterprise, architecture is there, whether or not you call it that. A technical debt. Now, how do you get out of it? You know, you may have decades of legacy technology. It takes careful strategy and analysis, often across complex digital product portfolios, a lot of contending interests at stake, not easy questions. But architects, I would say, finally, the architects have got to understand that the architect's job is to test hypotheses and not issue mandates and commandments. In general, the more that architecture can stay plugged into real hands-on technology, be running simulations. I myself have had a lot of rewarding experiences starting to work with virtual technology. Tools like Vagrant and VirtualBox have empowered me as an architect because I can stand my ideals up without needing $1 million in hardware to prove out some crazy architecture idea I might have. And in general, the more you can stay plugged in hands-on that way, the more value you're going to offer your enterprise. So that's the core of the digital operating model. It's all about digital transformation. It's about how we think about digital transformation at varying scales, how we understand the growth cycle and the problems that emerge at different sizes. I think we need a combination of the Agile and the traditional approaches. And if we think about it in terms of this scaling problem, then we start to be able to understand a little better how to reconcile these otherwise difficult problems, like what's the relationship of IT service management with DevOps and so on and so forth. And with that, I would like to hand it back to Carlos to introduce our next speaker.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. There was a lot of information in there, a lot that you know, wasn't even on the slides. There's a lot of references. For all the participants, just an FYI, what we're going to do is we'll work with Charlie after the call and gather a lot of these references that he mentioned during his presentation. A lot of the external things, you know, Puppet Labs and all these other things, even some individuals that he referenced in terms of good resources to go and look deeper into the things. We're going to pull all that together for you, and we'll reach out to you and send it out as after the call at a later date. You know, with all the references that he kind of called out, there's some great information in there that will be useful. I know I myself, when I'm on webinars, I'm scribbling away, so we'll make sure we get that out to you. Okay, so moving on, we now are going to have Christoph Goldenstern speak to us. Christoph is a member of Kepner-Tregoe's executive leadership team. As Vice President of Global Strategy and Service Excellence, he's responsible for KT's strategy as well as its Service Excellence Solutions. The Service Excellence Solutions is a set of consulting, training, and coaching services that are provided to technology companies and IT service organizations. Charlie, next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
A little on Kepner-Tregoe. Kepner-Tregoe is a provider of a data-driven, consistent, scalable approach towards incident, problem, and change management. And the objective of that is to deliver a world-class customer experience by reducing the downtime, issue recurrence, cost of service, and increasing IT stability. And with that, Christoph, it's all yours.
Thank you, Carlos. Appreciate the introduction, and also thank you, Charlie, to you for a fascinating presentation and giving us a bit of a model for growth in the digital era. So what I want to do here is I want to essentially tie into Charlie's second conclusion from the previous slide of needing more of a combination of agile and traditional approaches, and briefly touch on one particular operating model, if you want, in particular, that Charlie mentioned, that is DevOps. And given that Kepner-Tregoe's focus is very much on the IT operations side, I want to just contemplate for a minute what this operating model actually means for processes like incident and problem management going forward. So with that, I have 4 predictions, and that's really all they are, predictions. So take them all with a grain of salt, if you will. Number 1, we're going to see functional barriers being removed more and more. Number 2, the required skill sets are going to have to change somewhat. Number 3, how we manage and how we reward people will also have to change. Charlie talked a little bit about the rising importance of culture, and that culture just cannot be ignored anymore as we're trying to grow and scale up. And directly really tying into that point number 4, we also need to adjust some of our leadership behaviors. Next slide, please, Charlie. So today, we're still largely thinking in functional silos in IT, and Charlie made mention of that at various points of his presentation. And still, at least in the established IT organization, the focus is still very much on IT stability. As we optimize the business more and more for speed, continuous delivery, but also still stability at the same time, I believe that some of those barriers will have to be removed. For example, if we just take some of the labels off of things like incident, problem, change management, and just look at these 3 disciplines more as an end-to-end process, we now start to focus more on how we manage the flow of quality data across them versus just optimizing parts of them without sometimes delivering real business value to the end user. And what this will do, I believe, is if this were to happen, I think it's going to lead to a more and more of a blurring of the lines between some of these functions that have historically been more separated, like incident and problem management, where people now perform potentially both tasks and potentially even doing that in parallel. Next slide, please. So the other thing I believe it will lead to is IT engineers needing broader sets of skills. So if the lines are indeed blurring between functions and we have more multidisciplinary teams, then this will require our people to perform much more diverse roles. And this includes both operations and development, I believe. And coming back to this notion of problem solving and good problem solving, focusing on critical data, I think this means that troubleshooting becomes more of a universal base skill as we continuously release new features. There's one exception I see with that, and that's major incident management. Throughout many of our projects and engagements in that space, we have found major incident management to be a fairly specific and special skill set that combines both excellent troubleshooting with excellent facilitation and excellent communication skills, and applying all of these skills and capabilities under severe pressure, time, cost, and oftentimes customer pressure. And that's just not for everyone. There's some nurture here and there's some nature here. So I do believe we need to maintain, to some degree, specialized major incident management groups, certainly for some of our more critical applications. Next slide, please. Thirdly, and now we're starting to get a bit more into the conversation around culture, I think our performance system will also have to change to some degree. And again, this is really just a logical consequence of the previous 2 points I just made. We want to make sure that we don't limit people's thinking by putting them too much into a certain box. And what that means, I believe, is having to accept a greater degree of ambiguity in how people's roles are defined and performed. It means providing more autonomy to people and trusting them with that autonomy. It means rewarding more, as Charlie mentioned a number of times, rewarding based on outputs and not just tasks and actions performed. And also requires developing more of a coaching and mentoring culture to cross-train some of these skills that we're trying to transfer across these different parts of the operation. And finally, I believe it means putting team rewards ahead of individual rewards to incentivize more cross-functional collaboration. Next slide, please. And finally, by definition almost, I think what this will require is somewhat different behaviors from our leaders because, as we know, nothing really influences culture more than leadership. So at the end of the day, I believe there will be less of some of the traditional management practices that we all so used to. So there will be less focus on providing control and oversight, less top-down line management and more matrix management, less project and task management, On the other hand of the equation, I think it will require more of our leaders in terms of defining clear and specific outcomes from the client's perspective. It'll need more coaching and mentoring and facilitating versus just managing, and also providing more thought leadership to our teams around processes, systems, and products, etc. So with those 4 observations on what the operational impact of this new operating model might be, let me hand it back to Carlos to open things up for Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Christoph. That was great. I really like how you kind of pulled in that topic in with all of Charlie's information. So as a reminder, everyone, again, please, I know we've already received some questions. If we don't get to your question during this session, we will reach out directly to you with some feedback and some follow-up information with that. So please use the Q&A or the question mark symbol at the top of your screen. Send in the question, assign it to the panelists, and we'll try and go through all of those. So Charlie, the first question for you is, what do you mean by digital transformation? Isn't it just a little bit more, hype, the next hype cycle? Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I've had that discussion actually just this week. Is it just another marketing term? I'm actually not somebody who thinks of himself as always jumping on the next hype cycle thing. I think that there really is a distinct social and economic phenomena happening here with information technology becoming an increasingly pervasive part of all that we see and experience in society. We can look at things like social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. These are not all of it, but I think when you add that together with just all of the consumer-facing digital experiences we have nowadays, things like, I use Waze, for example. It's become a part of my life. Every time I get in the car, I turn on Waze because it helps me navigate the dynamic traffic patterns in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live. So I do think that it is a cultural transition, and it is longer cycle. I don't think it's going to just, something here today, gone tomorrow.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Charlie. Christoph, the next question is for you. What are some of the challenges you are seeing for an ITIL-based organization as they're moving to or towards DevOps?
Sure. So, I believe even with all these changes, ITIL is still quite relevant because it does provide a great foundation. It does provide certain alignment around terminology, but I think we're also got to be honest that ITIL and other frameworks that have perhaps over-amplified processes, as Charlie pointed out, has also led to some degree to some silo mentality in certain organizations. And I sometimes put that down to what I quote-unquote call a misinterpretation of ITIL as a process standard by a lot of organizations, and essentially using that as a rationale to build functions around every one of these processes, and then creating a lot of silos in the process, which I don't think was ITIL's intention. And what we're seeing when we work with a lot of these organizations is that there's a ton of data falling through the cracks in the white space between these functions. So I believe if we want to move to a model like DevOps, we do need a greater integration in operations first around some of these disciplines.
All right. Thank you very much, Christoph. Charlie, I'm going to try and kind of ping-pong back and forth between the two. Charlie, what's an industry example of digital transformation?
Great question. So, as was mentioned, I teach at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I use an example I call the digital chicken, and it is simply the increasing technological component of the poultry supply chain. 100 years ago, chickens ran around in the barnyard and they laid eggs and had little chickens and you ate them, and there wasn't a lot of technology involved. In fact, I don't even necessarily know how many chickens you had. Probably you had some idea. Nowadays, it's extraordinarily digitized. You have Internet of Things sensors in the massive poultry barns. You have complete and auditable records of all the feeds and medicines that the chickens were given. You have a complete supply chain, so if there are any issues with a given lot of poultry, you can actually trace it back and find the actual production history and cross-correlate it to, well, did the temperatures go off in the poultry barn at some given time. The chicken genome is sequenced, the DNA is sequenced, and you have selective breeding programs that are extensively documented. I could go on. I mean, it's just an amazing amount of digital components that enable the simple presence of a chicken drumstick on your plate at the 4th of July picnic in the U.S., you know. So that's, I think, a great example. We're seeing, you know, there's further agricultural examples, and, of course, GE with locomotives and Internet of Things sensors in the wheels of locomotives. I could go on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Charlie. Christoph, for you, are Agile and ITIL effectively incompatible?
Yeah, great question. I think the question that maybe a number of organizations are asking themselves right about now. So I don't think so personally. I recently just came across an image that showed Agile and ITIL as a sort of tug of war between speed and stability. But I think the reality is, at the end of the day, we do need both. We need both speed, but we also need quality and we need stability. Certainly, if we want to scale up. So while it may not be easy, I think we can optimize our business for both continuous flow and fast iteration by removing some of those barriers that I spoke about, but still build in some of the quality that some of the ITIL best practices, for example, provide. I think it just means that we need to streamline some of these practices, like root cause analysis, for example, and really use these concepts at speed with a focus on the most critical information that we need to gather, so we don't waste time in the process and we can still be fast in what we do.
Yeah, if I can jump in, Carlos, too?
Sure.
One way I would think about it, and it's maybe an oversimplification, is that Agile really shines at what I call my team level. But ITIL is where you get into the team of teams level. Now, that said, you still need to approach it with care and caution, as Christoph suggested, you know, and as I mentioned, the risk of implementing too many processes is a significant one. But what I will say to some of my friends in the Agile community is, okay, suppose that you're going to move a couple of petabytes over the wire, you're going to do a significant data migration over the wire, and you've got this plan for a couple weeks out, and as luck would have it, it hits the same time that the WAN team is going to take one of the circuits offline. Now, how is the data management team supposed to know this? How is the WAN team supposed to know this? There are significant activities that do take place in large enterprises that need some kind of coordination mechanism where the outcomes are not going to be good. Now, on the other hand, in terms of speed versus stability, one of the, I think, compelling outcomes of the DevOps research and the DevOps community experience is that actually speed to delivery is not opposed to stability. And in fact, when you have a DevOps pipeline that allows systems to be changed incrementally, when you actually get to the 10 deploys a day or 1,000 deploys a day, the stability does not need to go down. In fact, the stability can go up because changing systems in small increments is less risky than large waterfall batch releases. And this is one of the paradoxical outcomes of DevOps that I had to really change my mental model about, 5-6 years ago, when I was also thinking that change and stability were opposed. They're not.
Oh, thanks for adding that, Charlie. Hey, Charlie, along sort of that line, why do digital and Agile go together?
Well, I think certainly as we see an increasing emphasis on product management, what do we mean by digital? We mean products that embed significant amounts of computers and information technology, and we are in a constant process of product design and update. We're seeing our digital experiences evolving every day, hopefully for the better. Now, sometimes this can be a little off-putting, like when Facebook decides to go from one like button to 5 different flavors of like button, of reaction buttons, and everybody is a bit of a flurry about it. And I think also we have to be cautious that we can't just willy-nilly go upgrading mission-critical systems or systems where there really needs to be significant user training and orientation. But nevertheless, overall, these questions of user experience, usability, I mean, they just pervade all of the technology experiences we have. And Agile really has some very, very good answers and techniques for solving these design and collaboration problems, for getting that fast feedback, for understanding if you're on track with your product design. So I really do think the two go hand in hand.
All right. Thank you very much, Charlie. We're just going to ask one more question. If we didn't get to your question, we have a few others here. We'll reach out to you directly. We like to try to wrap up a few minutes early before the top of the hour so everyone can get to their next meetings. So we just have one more question, and we'll wrap things up and let you go on your way. So, Charlie, one last question for you. Earlier in the presentation, you spoke about, or you mentioned, limit work in progress. Can you speak a little bit more to that and what exactly that means?
Well, to limit work in progress, it's a concept that comes from the lean movement. And by limiting work in process, you get to faster flow. And in fact, it's very difficult when you see very gridlocked organizations, when you see organizations where the joke is it's always $1 million in a year. Well, I can't speak to the $1 million, but when it always seems like it takes your IT organization a year, it is very likely that they are managing too much work in process. And this is a key theme in the book, The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim. So if you want a more detailed exploration of the issues of work in progress, I would start with The Phoenix Project. And if you're still hungry for more on work in process, then go look at the work of a gentleman named Don Reinertson and the principles of product development flow. But basically, when you see organizations that just seem to be too slow and yet their processes seem all right, it is very likely because there is too much work in the system and the system is just bogging down. And this is a surprisingly widespread and difficult to understand issue, especially in organizations where people are constantly believing that efficiency is the be-all and end-all. Well, you know, 100% utilized freeway is a traffic jam. It's very efficient, but nobody's going anywhere.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a great example. I hadn't heard that example. Thank you, Charlie. So with that, everyone on the call, first of all, thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy schedules to spend with us today. On the screen, you see contact information for Charlie and Christoph, the website, obviously, for Kepner-Tregoe. If you have any questions that you didn't have an opportunity to ask us during this session, please contact Charlie or Christoph directly. I guarantee you they'll get right back to you. We are going to be sending out a follow-up email, like I said, with all the references. It might be a long list from Charlie, a lot of reading material that goes into these presentations that he puts together. So there'll be a reference list of things that he mentioned. There'll also be a link to the session so that you can follow through and share. So all that information will be shared out with you. So with that, Charlie, Christoph, thank you so much for the great information. Everyone on the participants, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days, and hopefully we get to speak to you again at the next session. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes your conference call for today. You may now disconnect. Thank you for joining and have a very good day. Thank you.